Our mission today is to unpack the intricate and sometimes, well, completely counterintuitive financial and physical mechanics of California's 45-year affordable housing deed restrictions.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at this specifically within the context of homeowners associations, or HOAs.
Right. And we should probably set expectations right out of the gate here. We all generally know the intent behind affordable housing. The goal is to help people get a foothold in extremely expensive real estate markets. But today, we are going to look purely at the structural realities of these agreements. We're examining how these 45 to 55-year deed restrictions actually function on a mathematical, mechanical level, regardless of the policy's intent.
Because the promise we are making to you, the listener, is that you are going to walk away from this deep dive with a massive aha moment. We're going to explore how the exact rules designed to keep these properties affordable over a half-century can inadvertently create this cascade of unintended financial and physical consequences.
Yeah, it really is a cascade.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the core concept. We're looking at these long-term deed restrictions. What exactly is the reinvestment paradox?
Well, the term paradox is really the perfect word for it.
Yeah.
The reinvestment paradox is a scenario where the very restrictions put in place to ensure a home remains affordable over a long timeline, say 45 to 55 years, actually end up creating significant long-term physical and financial risks for the exact people living there.
So it's the gap between what a rule is intended to do and how human beings actually respond to the financial incentives that rule creates.
Exactly.
So we're talking about a legal rider attached to the deed of the house. When someone buys one of these restricted units, they are signing a contract that fundamentally dictates what they can and cannot do with the equity and the resale value of that home for decades. But how do those protections end up putting the homeowner in jeopardy?
By fundamentally altering the traditional behaviors of homeownership. I mean, think about a standard housing market. Your home is both your shelter and your primary financial asset. When you legally detach a property's market value from the owner's ability to profit from it, you completely change how that property is going to be treated.
Right, because the incentive structure is totally different.
Yeah, the goal of the deed restriction is stability, but the mechanical execution of that restriction reshapes the incentive to maintain the asset.
Let's dive into the physical side of that, which brings up a concept referred to in the source material as affordable decay. And that phrase is just incredibly striking. The idea that the physical state of a building, the roof, the walls, the plumbing, is tied directly to the invisible equity rules written on a piece of paper. Walk us through the mechanics of how limited equity causes a building to physically deteriorate.
It comes down to pure economics, really, and the concept of sunk costs. In a traditional market rate home, if you spend $30,000 to renovate a kitchen or, put on a new roof or upgrade the HVAC system, you do it with the underlying assumption that you are adding value to your asset.
You expect to get a return, or at least a partial return on that investment when you eventually sell the house.
Right.
You might not get dollar for dollar back on a kitchen remodel, but you know it pushes the overall asking price higher. It makes the home more competitive. You are investing in your own wealth.
Exactly. But under these 45-year deed restrictions, that dynamic ceases to exist. Because the future resale price is strictly capped by the deed, putting a brand new top-of-the-line roof on the property isn't going to raise the price you can sell it for. The cap remains the cap.
Wow.
Therefore, any money you pour into major upgrades or even essential infrastructure repairs is money you will never, ever see again. It is treated mathematically as an unrecoverable sunk cost.
That is a brutal financial reality. So if I'm a homeowner in one of these units and my 20-year-old furnace starts making a weird noise, I'm faced with a serious dilemma. I could spend $10,000 to replace it with a high-efficiency model, but I know for a fact that my eventual sale price won't increase by a single dime to reflect that upgrade.
Precisely. And what's the rational economic response to that realization? The homeowner quickly figures out that their capital is better off sitting in a high-yield savings account or an index fund than being trapped in the ductwork of a restricted unit.
Which financially incentivizes owners to perform only the bare minimum maintenance.
Right. They patch the furnace, they put a bucket under the leaky roof. They hold back on reinvesting because they want to preserve their capital for a future unrestricted home purchase.
And that makes complete sense from the individual's perspective. It's not a moral failing or lack of pride in homeownership. It's just a direct, mechanical outcome of the incentive structure. But over a 50-year timeline, patching a roof instead of replacing it has compounding consequences.
It absolutely does. The result is that over the 45 to 55-year lifespan of the restriction, these units experience visible decay compared to their market rate peers. When you remove the financial rewards for maintenance, physical decay is inevitable. You've essentially created a rental mindset within a homeownership structure.
The owner's responsible for the upkeep, but they reap none of the financial upside of doing it well.
Exact.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the physical decay is only half of the story. Let's pivot to the purely financial side of this paradox. We've established that the equity growth is capped, which kills the incentive to maintain the physical structure. But surely they still walk away with some profit when they sell, right? I mean, still a better wealth-building tool than renting for a decade.
You would assume so, but the resale mechanics are highly restrictive, and they severely undermine that wealth-building illusion. When a buyer of one of these affordable units decides it is finally time to sell, they don't retain 100% of whatever limited appreciation the formula actually allowed. They're subject to what is called an equity sharing model.
Okay, let's do the math on that so we can really see how this plays out at the closing table for you guys listening.
Okay, let's say you bought a restricted unit, and over 10 years, the formula dictates that the maximum allowable sale price has increased by $50,000. In a normal world, that 50 grand is yours to help you buy your next place. But under an equity sharing model, that profit must be split with a local housing agency upon resale.
So they take a cut.
A big cut. Often the city might take 50% right off the top.
Wow. So instantly that 50,000 becomes 25,000.
Right. But we aren't done. On top of the equity split, there's usually a provision requiring the repayment of any initial down payment assistance. Let's say when you bought the place, the city gave you $20,000 in assistance to help you close. When you sell, that $20,000 has to be repaid from your proceeds.
Wait, let me make sure I'm following this. The house goes up 50,000 in allowable value. The equity split takes 25. You're left with 25. Then you have to pay back the $20,000 down payment loan. You are walking away with $5,000 in profit after a decade of homeownership.
That is the reality of how these formulas compound. It creates a severe double hit to the homeowner's finances. The compression of net proceeds means they walk away with significantly less capital than a traditional homeowner would, making that dream of leaping into an unrestricted market rate home incredibly difficult to achieve.
Okay, so that's the reality when they sell. But let's look at the day-to-day financial flexibility while they are actually living in the home. Let's say a pipe bursts or the foundation cracks. We aren't talking about a voluntary kitchen upgrade. We are talking about a catastrophic failure that requires $20,000 or $30,000 immediately. For a normal homeowner, if you don't have that in cash, you look at your home equity. You go to the bank. How does that work in this restricted system?
It largely doesn't. This introduces a state of severe liquidity constraint. Because the public restriction essentially owns the property's equity, the homeowner cannot access it. They are generally blocked from utilizing standard home equity lines of credit, or HELOCs, to fund those critical emergency repairs.
Why is the bank saying no exactly? If the house is worth something, why won't a traditional bank lend against it?
It has to do with lien positions and risk. When a municipality puts a deed restriction and an equity sharing agreement on a property, they often sit in a very powerful legal position. If a homeowner defaults on a HELOC, the second position bank wants the ability to foreclose and sell the house on the open market to recoup their money.
Right, that's standard.
But they can't do that here. The deed restriction prevents an open market sale, and the bank doesn't want to be entangled in a complex local government formula just to get their money back. So they simply refuse to underwrite the HELOC.
I really want you, the listener, to put yourself in those shoes for a second. Imagine finally achieving the dream of owning a home. You have the keys, your name is on the title, you've been paying your mortgage on time for 5 years. Then a massive storm hits and your roof caves in. You go to the bank for a standard HELOC, a tool used by millions of homeowners every day, and the bank flatly tells you no. They tell you that you don't actually own enough of the equity to borrow against it.
You are completely trapped. And you can see how this ties right back to the affordable decay we were discussing earlier. If you don't have $30,000 in liquid cash and you are legally blocked from accessing a HELOC, how on earth are you supposed to fix the crumbling infrastructure?
You can't.
Exactly, you can't. The liquidity track virtually guarantees the physical deterioration of the property. It is a closed loop, financial restriction leading directly to physical decline.
Okay, as if that wasn't intense enough, we have to talk about the vulnerability that really sets this whole paradox on fire. We've been talking about the unit itself, but these buyers are not living in a vacuum. A massive percentage of this restricted housing in California exists within homeowners associations, condos, townhomes, planned developments.
Yes, the HOA time bomb. This is perhaps the most precarious element of the entire structure. Buyers of these restricted units are still subject to standard homeowners association dues and special assessments, just like their market rate neighbors.
This is a massive clash of systems. On one side, you have a municipal deed restriction, placing an artificial rigid cap on your wealth, your resale value, and your income potential, because you had to have a restricted income just to qualify for the unit. But on the other side, you have private HOA managing the building.
Yeah.
And that HOA operates in the brutal, uncapped reality of the open market.
Yes.
They deal with real-world inflation for things like landscaping, insurance premiums, and construction materials.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see the fault lines forming. What happens when those two systems collide? The fundamental danger is that while the home's resale price and the owner's equity are strictly capped by the deed, the HOA fees are not capped at all.
Let's map out exactly how dangerous this is. Let's say a building has been suffering from deferred maintenance. Maybe it's a mix of market rate and affordable units, and the HOA board has been kicking the can down the road on repairs. Eventually, a massive repair is unavoidable. The entire complex needs new siding and balconies, and the HOA realizes they need $2 million to get it done. The reserve fund is empty. What do?
They do what any HOA has to do by law. They issue a massive special assessment, or they drastically spike the monthly HOA dues to cover the cost of the repairs. The HOA board doesn't have the luxury of caring whether your specific unit is deed restricted or not. They have a fiduciary duty to maintain the building. They simply divide the $2 million bill by the number of units and send you an invoice.
But for the homeowner in the affordable unit, this is catastrophic. They're getting a bill for $20,000. We just established they can't get a HULOC to pay for it. And because their income had to be relatively low to qualify for the house in the first place, they likely don't have the disposable income to absorb a sudden $300 jump in their monthly dues.
Exactly. When these HOA fees spike to cover deferred repairs, the unit's baseline affordability is completely destroyed. The very thing the 45-year deed restriction was created to protect a predictable, affordable cost of living is obliterated by the uncapped reality of HOA assessments.
It's like buying a budget car but being legally forced to maintain it with Ferrari parts, using mechanics who charge Ferrari labor rates. You might have bought the car cheaply, but that operational costs will bankrupt you.
That's a perfect analogy, and the ultimate consequence of that destruction is severe. When an owner cannot pay an HOA special assessment, the HOA has the power to place a lien on the property. This dynamic significantly increases the risk of foreclosure for the homeowner. The affordable housing mechanism, interacting with the open market HOA structure, essentially pushes the vulnerable homeowner toward losing the property entirely.
So we have an owner who might be facing an HOA special assessment they can't pay, sitting in a property that is physically decaying, unable to tap into their equity. Let's say they decide they've had enough, they want out. So what does this all mean when it's finally time to move? They want to sell the unit and just walk away. They face what can only be described as a massive resale roadblock.
It is a roadblock by design. These homes cannot simply be sold on the open market to the highest bidder. Remember, the intent of the restriction is to keep the home affordable for the next buyer. Therefore, resale prices are formulaically capped. They are strictly linked to the area median income, or AMI.
I want to spend a second on AMI because this is a concept that sounds very clinical, but it has massive implications for how a house is valued. How does an AMI-linked formula actually work in an inflationary environment?
It's a great question, and it's where the detachment from reality really happens. Let's say you live in a city where the real estate market is booming. Housing prices jump 10% in a year. But local wages, the area median income, only grow by 2%. Your deed restriction ignores the real estate market entirely. Your house's allowable sale price is handcuffed to that 2% wage growth.
So even if the open market dictates your home should be worth $500,000, the spreadsheet at the housing agency says, sorry, wages only grew 2%, so you can only sell it for $300,000.
Exactly. It completely isolates the asset from the actual economy around it. And it gets even more complicated because you can't just list it on Zillow and sell it to anyone who has $300,000.
Okay.
The buyer pool is severely restricted.
Right, because this isn't a one-and-done rule. The 45 to 55-year deed restriction doesn't disappear when the first owner sells. It carries over to the next owner.
Which drastically alters the fundamental dynamics of real estate liquidity. In a normal market, liquidity, the ease with which you can sell an asset, is driven by how many people want to buy it. But here, the ultimate consequence is that market liquidity shrinks exponentially. You are looking for a needle in a haystack.
Let's describe this hypothetical buyer. You need someone who meets the specific low to moderate income qualifications. They have to be willing to accept the capped equity rules and the equity sharing model for the remainder of the 50-year term. They have to be willing to endure the lack of HEOC access. And, crucially, they have to be willing to risk the uncapped HOA fees on a building that is likely already showing signs of affordable decay.
The pool of eligible and willing buyers is incredibly small. And to cap off all of these financial hurdles, there is one final agonizing detail for the seller. Even if you find that perfect buyer, you still have to convince a bank to get involved.
Which, as we discussed with the HELCs, is not an easy conversation. Banks like predictability.
Exactly. Traditional lenders are often highly hesitant to even underwrite mortgages for properties that have such complex resale formulas. Banks like assets they can easily value and easily liquidate if the buyer defaults. A property governed by an area median income formula with an equity sharing model and a multi-decade deed restriction is the absolute opposite of straightforward. It requires specialized underwriting, manual reviews, and a deep understanding of local municipal law. Most standard lenders will just look at the paperwork and pass.
So the lender hesitation makes it even harder to find a buyer who can actually secure the funding. You might find a willing buyer, but if they can't get a mortgage, the deal falls through. This leaves the original homeowner potentially trapped in a deteriorating illiquid asset. They can't afford to stay because of the HOA fees, but they can't sell because the buyer pool and the lending pool are so restricted. It really is a comprehensive cycle.
It is a perfect closed loop of unintended consequences. Every single mechanism designed to protect the affordability of the unit inadvertently creates a new trap for the person living inside it.
Let's do a quick summary of this deep dive to make sure we have the full picture of the reinvestment paradox from start to finish. It all begins with the deed restriction strictly limiting equity. That instantly evaporates the financial incentive to maintain the home, leading directly to sunk cost and physical affordable decay.
Then, whatever small appreciation is allowed is slashed by the equity sharing model and the repayment of down payment assistance, compressing the seller's proceeds and killing the wealth building potential.
While they live there, the homeowner is caught in a liquidity trap because the public restriction prevents them from getting standard HELOCs for emergency repairs. Meanwhile, they're sitting on an HOA time bomb, where uncapped fee spikes for deferred maintenance threaten to destroy the home's baseline affordability and trigger foreclosure.
And finally, when they try to escape the cycle, the formulaically capped prices linked to AMI, combined with the complex resale rules carrying over to the next owner, shrink the buyer pool and scare off traditional lenders, destroying the property's liquidity.
That is the complete cycle. And it is vital to reiterate here as we look at this impartially that we are not debating the intention behind affordable housing policies. The desire to create accessible entry points to homeownership in places like California is clear and understandable. What we are examining today, strictly through the lens of structural mechanics, are the impartial realities of how a 45-year restricted deed actually functions on a financial and physical level within a free market system.
Exactly. We aren't taking sides on the policy itself. We're just reading the blueprints of the machine to see how the gears actually turn when they meet human behavior and open market inflation. And they turn in ways that are deeply counterintuitive.
You do. And it leaves us with a profound question to consider.
It does. If a homeowner's incentive to maintain a property evaporates on day one because their equity is capped, and they have zero access to that limited equity to fix critical emergencies, and they are constantly battling uncapped HOA fees, what exactly is the physical and financial state of these buildings going to look like half a century from now? When that 45 to 55-year deed restriction finally expires, what is actually left of the building?
That is a chilling thought to leave on. A building that has been systematically, mechanically starved of capital for 50 years, suddenly entering the open market. You, our listener, have so much to chew on today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden mechanics of the systems around you. Keep looking past the surface of how things are supposed to work versus how they actually work, and we will catch you on the next one.